Start by mapping your third lines, seeing where you can line up different objects within the golden ratio. Map in the contours of your objects, watching out for tangents, checking angles, especially for your cube, run plumb lines both vertically and horizontally, and check your negative space. All of these methods will help you place your drawing accurately. Make sure to have your thumbnail drawings and photo reference out. This drawing is about building observational skill and should not be from imagination. Map in your two-value statement to get a sense of how the dark shapes and light shapes work within your composition. Remember, you don't want that initial layer down for the two-value statement to be too dark. You want something that you can build darker values on top of to make those occlusion and core shadows stand out.
Okay, so now I'm at a point where I'm ready to start working from dark to light, and I'm also ready to start cross-hatching. So we're going to be doing cross-hatching as a way of working up our values. An example of that here on this little sphere. So cross-hatching is very similar to kind of that cross-contour approach that we have tried before. But we're also layering in value, and we're having the way that we're putting down those marks on the paper go across, emphasize the form. So here you can see my cross-hatching marks are rounding out because I'm working with this round object. So before I go back into a time-lapse mode with this video, I just want to show a bit of that here for you to see. So first I'm beginning with my occlusion shadows, and I'm using my 6B, a bold pencil, to get those in. The occlusion shadows where an object touches down or touches against another object. It's very dark there because those objects are touching and no light is penetrating into that area. And it's just where that object is touching down. It doesn't extend up the form, it's not an outline. So it's going to be at the bottom of all of these objects. And I'm starting with my occlusion shadows with my boldest pencil. I'm pressing down hard to get a nice, bold, rich value. And then as I go up into my other shadows, I'm going to make sure that I'm not pressing as hard. I'm not getting it as bold because those other shadows are not as dark as the occlusion. So the occlusion shadows kind of keying in are really dark shadows for us, and we can use this as a comparison for our next shadows, and we know we don't want them to go that dark. So we're kind of working in this way where we're keeping in mind those different parts of the shadow, the halftone, and the light family, and we're working our way gradually into the light and comparing these values as we go. And that makes it so that you can really begin to capture an accurate sense of the value structure on these objects and their light logic. But if you work kind of randomly, it's much harder. You're kind of popping around all different parts of the light and shadow family and not really comparing the values you're putting down. It's a lot harder to accurately capture that sense of light logic. Okay, so we got those occlusion shadows in there. Now we're gonna go into more of the core shadows, and I'm going to start to establish that value with cross-hatching marks. And I'm just taking a moment to sharpen the tip of my pencil a bit so I can start to put in those lines. Okay, all right, that should work. All right, so the core shadow is on the form. It's the darkest shadow on the form, okay? And it's basically separating the light mass and the shadow mass from each other. What I'm noticing within my scenario, this is the still life setup that I'm working with. The core shadow's going down here. It starts to sort of taper out as it gets closer to that area of reflected light. So light is bouncing on top of that cube, bouncing back into the shadow, making that reflected light show right there, and it makes that core shadow taper down essentially. Okay, so I'm going to start to do these cross-hatching marks, and I'm working with a round object here, so I'm thinking back to that cross contour, right, and making these lines have that sense of this form. And then you're going to cross these lines, you're going to make these crisscrossing kind of lines together to build up value. And these lines going this other direction are also going to have a sense of this round form. Okay, so building in that core shadow, building up these lines. I'm also going to begin to just cross-hatch more generally into the shadow mask and then return back to this core shadow and build it up darker. So let's get some more of these crossing lines. Again, thinking of the shape of this object, having our lines kind of describe this object in a sculptural way. That's why cross-hatching, drawing this way can be so powerful, so you can get a real sense of the sculptural form of the object. And it's sort of three-dimensionality, how it occupies space. Okay, so now I'm going to go back into that core. I'm going to build up more layers. That's one way building value. And I can also be pressing harder in my core. Not as hard as I was here, but I am pressing a bit harder. I want it to stand out from the rest of this. So building up those layers is going to give you more value. Crossing those layers too. Pressing harder, those are all ways of building up value. And then of course the pencil that you're using too. This is a 6B. You know, if you start to go into the 2Bs, it's going to be less bold. The H pencil is going to be light. So that could be great for midtones and the light mass. Okay, so our core is kind of like this, bigger towards the top, becomes much smaller, tapered off as we get towards a more light section in our shadow. Okay, so one thing before I switch back to time-lapse, and I'll just continue working my way up the value scale, from the darkest shadows, occlusion, to the core, addressing the rest of the shadow mask, then working to the halftones and the light, okay? Before I do that though, I also want to just show a bit cross-hatching on this surface. So this is going to be a little bit different. So this is a round object, so our lines, we're thinking of having them wrap around that round object, right? This is a cube which has these flat planes. So our cross-hatching is going to reflect those flat planes. And we're going to have it follow the angles of these planes. So I'm going to have lines going this way and lines going this way. Okay, so first I'm going to just establish a bit of cross-hatching throughout this entire shadow mass. And with cross-hatching, I'm using more of the kind of tip of my pencil to get those lines down. Okay, so let's get some cross-hatching in here, following the angles of the planes in this cube. Then I'm noticing on this cast shadow, it's darker on this side, and there's more light kind of coming into the shadow over in here. So it's darker and crisper on this side of the cast shadow, and it becomes a little lighter and grayer and softer as it goes out over here. So I can start to, again, layer in some darker lines in this cross-hatching pattern. Okay, I'm going to sharpen my pencil for a moment. Just establishing some of these layers, following the planes of my cube. Same thing on here. This plane of the cube, again, I'm going to follow the angles of this plane, but because it's a flat surface, these lines are going down straight, right? They're following the form still, right? So following the form, and you build up value with bolder lines and more layers. Now the cone, also rounded. It's a round object, so you're not just going to put flat lines. You're going to think about, if you put a string around this, what would that string look like, right? Probably it would be rounding out like that. Okay, and then these lines would be following the planes within this cone. Okay, all right, so I'm going to switch back to the time lapse so you can see me layer up value. I'm going to be doing cross-hatching on these objects and maybe in their cast shadows. Back here I'll probably just plane in more value, have it just be more smooth. All right.
Continue adding more layers of cross-hatching. Squint at your drawing and then at your photo reference to gauge the value structure. You should be seeing harder transitions in your cube with those flat planes. The sphere should have gradual and soft transitions because it is rounder. The cone will as well, and the value will intensify at the tip of the cone. As you layer in your cross-hatching, keep making sure that your marks are emphasizing the form. As you work into the light family, switch to a harder pencil and have a lighter application. Reserve the white of the paper for the highlights and the brightest areas in your drawing.
Okay everyone, I'm getting to the finishing stages of my drawing. I've done the cross-hatching on my objects. Now I could go back in a bit and maybe re-emphasize some of my occlusion shadows. You can go back in and kind of re-emphasize your core shadows if you want those to stand out a bit more. But now I also kind of want to address the background and the tabletop right here as well. I really want the bright lights of my objects to be standing out and to be the brightest thing within my composition. So I can also go back over those light areas, make sure I'm getting out any, if there's any graphite that got into them, kind of dirtied those really light areas, get that out with my kneaded eraser. Okay. This part of the cube goes quite bright. Can get rid of any extra little lines in there. Maybe re-emphasize part of the shadow side of that a bit. It's a nice area of contrast. And now I want to lay down more value back in here and also through here. I'm going to show a little bit of that in real time. So back here, I'm not going to do cross-hatching. I want the cross-hatching on my objects to stand out more. So back here, I'm going to do more of this smooth approach, and I can even kind of do scumbles as well. So this could be a nice mixture of different mark-making methods. But basically, I want to start to get more value back in here to make the lights of my objects in particular stand out. Now I don't want to go as dark as, say, the really dark parts of my objects, so you don't want to compete with the shadow areas, but you do want your light areas to stand out. So again, it comes back to making those comparisons between values. I can even darken it a bit more around the light mass of my sphere, for example. Really make that light pop. So I'm planing in some value back here, dark value. I'm also kind of scumbling a bit. You want that different, you want a different texture, you want kind of a smoother or more atmospheric texture back here so that the lines on your objects make them pop forward. Okay, so I'm also going to put some value back in here But again, just wanting to make sure I don't compete with the shadows on my objects. And I also want to get some value down in here. Now, if we look at the reference for a moment, these objects are being hit by light, the table is being hit by light. This is all part of the light mass, right? But it's a little bit darker on this side because it's farther away from the light source. So I'm going to go in with my H pencil. Same thing, I'm going to be adding some either just smooth planes of graphite or even kind of light scumbles. Using that whole side of my pencil. And I'm going to bring in some value, putting down some light value through here. And even kind of through here as well. I've done that before on this side of the cube to make that side of the cube stand out and to kind of eliminate this side line of the cube. We want the values to show these objects if we can, rather than an outline. All right, so we're kind of eliminating outlines. Just gonna mass in a little bit of kind of light value through here to make these bright whites stand out more. Definitely back through here too. Back here, I'm actually going to switch to my 2B because even though there is this kind of light shape back here, it's way farther away from the light source and it's going darker. So this little shape is part of my background shadow. So definitely going to get that darker. But even in this little light shape, I'm going to add down a little bit of tone as well. So now we're just going through seeing where we need to add tone, a little bit of tone to make these bright whites of the highlights on our objects stand out.
As you work into the light family, switch to a harder pencil and have a lighter application. Reserve the white of the paper for the highlights and the brightest areas within your drawing. Is your background helping your objects stand out, or your objects sinking back? Consider darkening the background behind the light masses of your objects, while also making sure it doesn't go darker than the shadows that you really want to stand out, like your core shadows and occlusion shadows.